All right, we're going to manually check some F3s. Here I am in the expression project folder. I'm going to call up script 9. I'm going to copy it into a new prot script. I'm going to run it, and it's going to come up with a whole list of people that are yet to be checked. So there's a lot more than usual because we just ran a lot. We don't have to worry about the first one, C138. We're going to work on the people who have typical hearing so far. You'll notice in the info window, it'll update you for who hasn't been started and who's done. I can see that one person has been started, so I'm going to pick up on that person, N439. I'm going to select that person here. Okay, so I'm just going to check these formants. So this one is pretty high for a third formant, but I can see that the tracking is pretty good. I can also see that there's a lot of energy right around there for this word, leash, and we should see right where that strong energy is in sh, that's where the F3 should be. So I just clicked on that point. I'm going to hit correct to cursor. For the next one, the tracking here is not so good, but it actually did correctly get the third formant, or at least it looks like it did. So I'm going to just change the formant settings here to something that works for most talkers here, 4200 Hertz for formants. So in this case, it still arrived at the same answer for the third formant here, so that's pretty good. I'm going to just keep that where it is at the cursor. Here it kept the settings that I just inherited from the last trial, but you'll notice the F3 is a little bit off here. What I want to do is kind of interpolate with my eye along here, and right where it is right here is about where it would pick up. So I'm going to sort of avoid the sort of dubious curve up right there and kind of connect these smoother points here. And right at the vowel onset, I'm going to say here is the third formant. Click correct the cursor. Move on to the next one. This next one already looks good. I can hit OK. Now the next one, we have the fricative at the end of the word. We can see this stable track of energy in the sh, and that's exactly where the F3 is. So I'm just going to hit OK. Okay, for the next one, we have, it looks like it's just tracking the second formant here. So I'm going to move this up here where I think the third formant is. And this is pretty high. You can notice it's 3400 Hertz. That's pretty high for a third formant, but we have a pretty feminine sounding talker here, probably a smaller person. And so I think that that's okay to select for our third formant there. You'll notice whenever I'm making a manual selection, I'm hitting correct to cursor. Here I have another F3. We're kind of seeing that transition again here. So it's right in the middle of that transition, what I think is fine. I'm just going to click a little bit closer to the vowel onset right there and correct the cursor. For this one here, the tracking doesn't look very good. So I'm actually going to start by turning the formants off just to see if I can notice anything. Now it looks like 1, 2 with 3 up here, but 3800 is too high for a third formant. That's more like a fourth formant in most cases. So let's take a listen. Nourish. So this is nourish. And so for we know that the third formant is really low. So as it turns out, this section right down here is actually the second and third formant together. So the third one obviously is a little bit higher. And so I'm going to select right here for the third formant for 2400-ish is usually pretty fine. Here we have another one where the tracking doesn't look perfect at the actual point of the measurement, but we can see the third formant up here. It just didn't continue through, so I'm going to put the cursor right here where it should be, right here, and then I'll hit correct cursor. Okay, the next one, we see it's tracking the second formant, and the third one is a little bit above that, so I'm going to click on that and correct the cursor. All right, this one looks like it tracked pretty well. Just going to hit OK. And if you see that it's tracking well and you hit correct a cursor, it's the same thing as hitting OK. So here we have a lot of energy up here for what looks like a sh sound, like relinquish or extinguish. So we can see that this one, just like before, it has like a little of a curve coming up. But if I kind of interpolate that by eyeball, the connecting point from this last nicely tracked formant to this one in the fricative is right around here at the vowel onset. So I'm going to click close to where that energy in the fricative is, and I'll hit correct to cursor. Here's another one where we have pretty good tracking of the actual formant, even though the tracking on the screen doesn't look very good. So I'm going to just click right here because it looks like it looks like it estimated it well before the actual end of the vowel. So I'm going to click right around here, and I'll hit correct to cursor. Here it looks like the tracking's fine, so I'm just going to hit OK. Here the cursor looks like it landed in the middle of two formants, so I'm going to actually bump it up. I'm going to click closer to the vowel end just so I can eyeball it here. Now, wherever I click in time doesn't actually matter for this, because all the script is getting is the frequency of where my cursor is. So the reason I'm clicking over toward the segment boundary between the vowel and the fricative is just so I can get a good sense of where I think that third formant is. So I'll click right here. It's around 3000 Hertz, which is normal for this talker. I'll hit correct to cursor. This one looks fine. So the tracking is a little bit disjointed here, but I think the cursor is just about where it should be for that. So I'll hit OK. Okay, this one, the tracking looks a little off on the screen, but the tracking for the actual cursor, the crosshairs here, is pretty good. So I'm going to hit OK. Here, the crosshairs is pretty good, pretty accurate right on that third formant. I'll hit OK. Here, looks pretty good again, right around 3000, that's normal. I'll hit OK. This one is a little bit off because it's lower than I want it to be, because what happened here is that this one dot ended up a little lower than it should be. If not for that, I think the formant would be up here where it's actually tracked. So if we were to kind of eyeball and interpolate between this point and that point, I think right at the vowel boundary, it's right where those dots are. So I'm going to click right where those dots are, hit correct cursor. Here's one where the tracking, I think, just settled for the second formant. We can see it's way lower. It's 2000, and for this talker, the third formant has been closer to 3000. So I click up here. It's a little higher, but just to do a listening check, the furnace, but it's not the because this is where the syllable is. If I just back out a little bit. And here we have more like a high front vowel. So even if I turn the formants off, I think that we do see that third formant going up here, and we see some energy in the fricative here too. So I'm going to click right here. I'm going to turn the formants back on just to make sure it's tracking there. Hit correct cursor. And here we have pretty good tracking at the crosshairs. It drops off a little bit on the screen, but I think it's tracking pretty well because you can see that those dots there on that line. So I think that'll be fine. This one also looks pretty good. I'll hit OK. It's a little bit easier when you have a sh sound because there's a lot of energy in the fricative that aligns right with it. So in this case, I think the tracking in the vowel looks pretty stable. I'll click on there. Here, it's definitely wrong, right? Because you can see that there's a formant way above it, a formant way below it. And I think what happened here is that it tried to interpolate between this point, and the measurement time was exactly the wrong place. So I'm just going to restore my mouse cursor up here where the third formant is. We have another one around 3400, which normally is pretty high, but for this talker we've seen that a lot. So I'm beginning to be convinced that this is in fact where it should be. And we do see some evidence of that resonance following through in the fricative as well. So I've clicked here. I'm going to hit correct cursor. Okay, here's one where the tracking's pretty bad on the screen. I'm going to take a listen.
Gash.
So gash. So we see the third formant kind of sliding down here and then coming back up for the sh. So the interpolation by eyeball here between this point and this point up here, I'm going to select this part of the vowel. You can see that there's some energy right there. So we can see that there's there's some tracking here. It's just being thrown off right here because of the loss of intensity. So right around here, and in fact, if we turn the formants off, we can see where that energy is. If I click over here so you can see it, right? So right around here is where we see that. So I'll turn the formants back on. That's where my cursor will be. And now we have some pretty good tracking. So we've seen just about all the different cases that we're going to see from this talker. And we've developed a bit of an intuition for where the formants should be. So this one looks good. This one, the tracking on the screen doesn't look good, but we can see that the tracking is pretty easy to follow with the mouse. So I'm going to click right here. Pretty high up in that 33-3400 range, but we can see that it follows through the fricative. So hit correct to cursor. Here's one that looks good. I'll just hit correct to cursor there, same as hitting OK. Here's the third formant. It's already marked where I think it should be, so I'm just going to hit OK. And this one also looks pretty good. So this talker we're almost done with. I'm going to stop it for now, and we'll leave it up for the next, whoever wants to pick this one up. Now if we run this for another talker, let's run it on someone we haven't done before, like I don't know, 460. This one, it looks like the tracking's very good. I'll hit OK. Tracking's pretty good here. So there's a little bit of curviness to this, but I think this, I can move this up just a little bit to make sure it's meeting where the fricative resonance is as well. Here, what's going on? It looks like this person barely pronounced this syllable, but it does look like it tracked where the third formant is. So let's just take a listen.
Word support. Word support.
Yeah, so this is the word support, and the schwa after the S is just so short we can barely see it. But the cursor is in fact in the right position. I might click it up just a pixel or two there. But you know, there's not much we can do here, but that is where the third formant is. Okay, this tracking looks pretty good. Not going to touch it. This one also looks very good. So it looks like the default settings for this person worked pretty well for the most part. So I'm not having to do a lot of editing on this one. This is how we hope most of them should be, but occasionally have a little tiny nudge right here because you can see the crosshairs is a little lower than what we expect the formant to be. So I'm just going to click that up just a little bit right there. Okay, and this one already looks good. That's okay. This one right here, this is another, it looks like a really, really short vowel. There's not much I can do with it. It is in fact tracking where the energy is, so I'm not going to touch it. Just hit OK. Okay, this one looks fine. This one just has tracking up there at the F3, right around 3000, which is pretty normal. Okay, this one I'm going to nudge it up just a little bit because it looks like it was pulled down by this mistracked point here. So I'm going to pull it right back up to where those points are. And then hit correct to cursor. Okay, and this one I'm going to pull it a little down to where the points are. Then hit correct to cursor. All right, this one's already good. I'll hit OK. This one, there's a little bit of mistracking right at the boundary. Exactly where we don't want it, but the tracking is actually not that bad. I'm just going to nudge it up by a few pixels or two. There we go. All right, there we have pretty good tracking. I'll just hit OK. Oh, pretty good tracking here. So this is how we expect it to be. Not too much adjustment. This is a pretty fast one. This one, because the measurement's taken a little bit in, it looks like the formant's undergoing a transition. And it's being tracked in the middle of that transition. I'm going to put it back up to where the actual energy is right there. Remember, we want to center this right on the F3, which is constant with the fricative and leads into the vowel, right at that boundary. All right, so we're seeing pretty good tracking with this person, so I'll discontinue this. But hopefully this is pretty helpful walkthrough for a lot of the different situations where we might need to nudge the tracking up or down. So, you know, feel free to just check in with me for anything that's a little bit odd. And if you see one that's really difficult and you really don't even know where to start it, you can just always stop it and it'll just leave off right where, you know, it'll just pick up right where you leave off. And then I can take a look at it with you We can look at it as a group, and you can just jot it down if you want to return back to it.